Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a very, very special episode of the Space Show. I'm your host, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Frost, joined with noted Space Show fan Admiral Kerry Jackson. And if you skipped the last 4 episodes because we were talking about the animated series, welcome back. But because now we're on to some really juicy stuff, you guys. Today we're talking about Star Trek, the motion picture from 1979. And Carrie is the movie's #1 fan. He's been so excited for this episode in particular.
Now, before we go any further, I want everyone to know, I know this movie isn't good, okay? I love it just the same, all right? I just want to put that out there for myriad reasons, which we'll get into.
Yeah, there's a couple of where to start, except at the beginning, I guess. The thing about the coming from the original series into this motion picture, wow, what a leap in Star Trek.
I know.
Really?
That's #1 as to why I love this movie.
It really gives you some perspective on how big the Federation and Starfleet actually is, because now we have bigger rooms, we have more people, we have bigger music even. So many extras, you know?
Well, I mean, you always heard Kirk talk about the lives of 430 crewmen. Well, this time you get to see a good chunk of them.
We actually get to see at least 30 of them, right?
At least.
And, bigger sets, you know, this first scene in the movie where we see the introduction of the ridged forehead Klingons with their language that we'd never heard before, created by James Doohan, by the way.
Oh, yes.
You know, the graphics, I will say, probably kind of similar to the show a little bit. But, I mean, I don't have a good comparison because I didn't watch, you know, the original series without the remastered effects. So to me,
exactly,
all the effects just kind of look the same.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, is that the Enterprise that you saw on the original series with the refurbished special effects, that's CGI. The original series it was all models. It was all models, and you had to shoot it just right, and it had to be done just right. And this movie is all models, no CGI.
Oh, really?
In 1979, the CGI was not even where it could be to do anything like this. This is all models. That's another reason that I love this movie so much.
That is crazy. The very first scene with the Klingons, and when the Klingons are getting attacked, I thought, for whatever reason, I'm like, oh, it's the Enterprise. The Enterprise is going to show up, and it's the Enterprise doing all this Klingon destruction. No, it was something totally else that I didn't really put together until we cut to, I think it's San Francisco, where Admiral Kirk is chief Starfleet officer or something like that. Like, he's in charge of Starfleet operations.
Yeah. And head of Starfleet operations for 3 years? Did he say 2 years? 3 years?
So when he's talking later to Willard Decker, Willard Decker says that he hasn't logged any star hours for 2.5 years, and this takes place about 4 years after Turnabout Intruder. So I feel like the timeline is kind of jumbled here, and I feel like some more time should have passed.
Well, there was more time. After Turnabout Intruder, they still had another year and a half out in space with different adventures.
The animated series.
Animated series is part of that, and there was a bunch of other stuff. So there was a good chunk of time. But once they got back to Earth from the 5-year mission, then this is where the timeline starts to take place. So that's where he's, why you were like the first successful 5-year mission to come back. And by golly, we're going to make you an admiral, and we're going to put you in charge of Starfleet and a desk job, Jim, and you're going to love it.
But also, it's kind of crazy the upgrades that the Enterprise has gone through in those 2.5, 3-ish years, because we've got iPhone 15 version of the Enterprise, right? You guys were not kidding when you said this movie is mostly spaceship porn, because listen. Okay, so Captain Kirk, he's getting the crew back together because they got to go out and find out what this weird entity is that's destroying ships out there. And so Kirk is like, I'll just take the Enterprise back, which I don't like the way Kirk handled any of this.
He was an asshole about it.
He was a huge asshole about the entire thing. He's like, I'm just going to take the Enterprise back. And so he's getting the crew back together for one last heist, right? And so he meets Scotty, and I was like, Scotty, my friend Scotty, so happy to see my friend Scotty. And then we get roughly 20 minutes of the introduction of the new and improved Enterprise. 4 minutes, 26 seconds.
I timed it.
That's too long.
No.
I was so excited. And the music does such a phenomenal job here too. First of all, my ADHD is really showing. The new and improved Star Trek theme, which is, I was like, why does this sound so familiar? Oh, this is just the intro on Next Generation. And so I see that they have just kept it. But it's very loud and triumphant. And when we first get a glimpse of the back end of the Enterprise, the music, the theme is just, it's so delicate and treasured and quiet and reverential. And really giving this ship the moment it deserves. And then you get that front reveal, and then the music, the crescendo is just so overwhelming. And the whole time I'm like fist pumping on my couch, like, yeah, the Enterprise, baby. I can see why people would be so excited about this, because we never got this huge grand exterior tour of the Enterprise.
Exactly. And that's another reason why I love this movie. A, that's a model, first of all. B, this gorgeous looking, I mean, you have to remember, back in the day, the original series effects were terrible. And then along came Star Wars. And all of this amazing special effects. And I kept thinking after like the 20th time I saw Star Wars, why can't we do this with Star Trek? We need to do this with Star Trek.
Has anybody gotten in touch with Star Trek? Have they told them that they can do this?
Let's get Star Trek on the phone. And so I was so excited when I'm sitting there. In 1979, I got my mom to take me to the Fox Theater in Provo, because that was the closest that it was playing from my little farmland community. And the first showing, it was a noon showing, and to be there and see that up on the big screen, you're just like,
my jaw would be on the floor.
I was, but that's. See, this is why everyone jokes about that's my spaceship porn. That's,
you timed it. It's 4 minutes, 26 seconds. For me, it felt like a half hour of pure spaceship pornography. But it was cool because we never really got to understand the scale of the Enterprise. And this really highlighted it.
Yeah, and when you're looking at that, the shots of the ship, you realize that the Enterprise is not as big as we thought it was. I mean, if you look at the saucer section, the thin part of the saucer section, that's only like 3 or 4 stories is all.
Yeah.
So I thought that the Enterprise was much bigger, and then seeing it that way, I went, oh, it's not that big. It's not as big as I thought it was. Don't get me wrong, it's big.
It is. It's just tiny but mighty. And then the whole scene ends with an actual docking penetration. When the little shuttle that Scotty and Kirk are on docks itself into I thought it was so extremely on the nose, but you know what? I'm totally here for it. I was also really nervous to see our friends again, because it had been a minute. I hadn't, we watched the original series and we watched the animated series, so we hadn't seen our friends in a while. And I was kind of nervous that I was like, oh no, are they going to be different? And I don't know. I was just so nervous. But the minute Kirk shows up and the minute Scotty shows up, I was like, yay, my friends are back and I'm so happy to see them. And Admiral Uhura is gonna be there too. And they get on the ship and Admiral Uhura is there, and Sulu is there, and Chekhov is there.
Well, Uhura's not an admiral.
She is. They call her Admiral Uhura.
No.
Yeah.
Are you sure? That's not your ADHD?
No, I literally Googled it because they called her Admiral Uhura. I'm doing it. Admiral Uhura, Star
Okay.
Trek, motion
I don't
picture. I
I
cannot
don't
believe.
recall that.
Cannot believe. Let's see. Let's go to our friends. You're not Memory Alpha.
Memory Alpha will take you down an entire hole and we'll never get the answer for 10 minutes.
Yeah. You're just gonna have to take my word for it that they said Admiral Uhura, and I did Google it after the fact, and it said Admiral Uhura.
Okay.
So, yeah. Anyway, so we get on we get on the Enterprise and we meet Willard Decker, the current captain of the Enterprise, noted son of Decker from the Doomsday Machine, who was going after his white whale, the the forbidden fleshlight out in space, and he was going crazy over that. And he's pissed because this old guy just comes in and is like, hey, by the way, I'm just going to take over this ship again. And he is like, this is not the same Enterprise that you flew. This is an entirely brand new Enterprise. You don't know nothing about it. And this is kind of highlighted in this initial scene where we meet, everybody on the crew, and it's kind of a mess.
I think I know where you're getting Admiral Uhura. I think you're confusing her with Admiral Nagura, who is the head of Starfleet, who Kirk had to go and talk to about getting command of the Enterprise. Because as he lands in San Francisco and he meets his Vulcan first officer, he says, "I'm going to have a meeting with Admiral Nagura. It will last approximately 3 minutes. After that, I want you to report to me aboard the Enterprise." I think that might be where your confusion is.
I promise.
Because even Scotty says as they're about to take him over for the porn flight, I've just named it the porn flight. It's like a wine flight, but it's a porn flight. And he says, I doubt it was that easy with Nagura.
Okay, even if they don't say it, I've gone to Memory Alpha. Uhura,
in your heart.
In my heart of hearts. Uhura was depicted in the novels as later going on to achieve the rank of Admiral and becoming the head of Starfleet intelligence in the 24th century.
Yes.
So I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong. She will be an Admiral. She's not an Admiral yet. She's on her way, though.
Is Uhura an Admiral? You know what? Get in the comments. Everyone's going to get in the comments about this, and that's fine.
Yeah,
it's
down
fine.
Down there.
So we meet everybody on the crew, and it is a mess. And everyone's wearing these outfits that I can only describe as a Skims collaboration. I don't know if you know what Skims are. It's the Kim Kardashian fashion line. But it looks like a Starfleet Skims collaboration, and it is ugly.
I'd like to think of it as a Starfleet slumber party. All the uniforms look like pajamas.
And I remember one of the trivia bits I remember reading was Nichelle Nichols was not a fan because they were not very Uhura. They were so like, is this a cult?
Although I'll say this though, she looks great in her uniform.
Oh yeah,
even though she
fantastic.
may not have liked it, she rocked it because she's amazing. So
yeah, she looks fantastic. While we're kind of getting our grips on what the state of the current Enterprise is, there's a malfunction with the transporter, and Kirk goes to try to fix it. And I was like, man, is Kirk going to just Mary Sue his way around the Enterprise and fix everything? And he doesn't. This transporter mishap kills 2 people. And they contact the Federation base where they're beaming these people from, because they're stuck essentially in the buffer pattern, right? And the Enterprise can't get them, but it's too late for them to go back to where they came from. So they get in touch with the Federation where these 2 people had just beamed from. Horrific screaming sounds, by the way. And their response is, what we got back didn't live long, fortunately. Holy shit. What an implication.
Well, and now you know why McCoy doesn't like the transporter.
Do not blame him.
And that's the end of Commander Sonak, his Vulcan that he wanted as first officer.
Oh, so
that was him, yeah.
So Kirk he's trying to get the crew back together. We get Aaliyah, who is a Deltan, who I don't think we've ever met a Deltan before.
Okay, let's talk about the Deltans for a minute.
Hey.
First of all, here's an action figure of Lieutenant Ilea, or the Ilea probe, as it says here.
Oh, yeah. Spoiler alert.
As you can see. And it comes with parts of V'ger. We'll get to that later. But in this Star Trek the Motion Picture, the novelization by Gene Roddenberry.
Carrie is holding up the novelization, a physical book.
They talk about the Deltans.
Oh.
All right. And because she notably says, and this was a line that threw all of us when we saw it, little Carrie in 1979, who says, "My oath of celibacy is on record, Captain." And we're like, what? So I had to get the book to see what was going on.
What's the deal with that?
The Deltans fuck.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because here it is, Ilea. Let's see. Welcome aboard, Lieutenant, blah, blah, blah. Hello, Ilea Decker. Kirk found himself eyeing the exchange with some concern. It was becoming clear the two knew each other well, probably romantically. With anyone but a Deltan, of course, it would have been Decker's affair, no concern of Kirk's, but the fact that she was a Deltan changed that. Still, he realized that if it had been a romance, they could not have fully consummated it, or Decker would not be here. On the other hand, if Decker were still attracted to her, that could also be a serious problem. Kirk could hardly afford any risk to the man who was both his XO and science officer. Anyway, he says, I was stationed there. It goes on to talk about how the Deltans, says, my oath of celibacy had come up. Starfleet requirement whenever Deltans served with human crews. Starfleet reports our last 6 crew members are ready. Oh, okay, anyway. But he goes on about the Deltans, and they excrete a pheromone that makes humans horny.
Oh.
And the Deltans have this kind of free love attitude on their planet. So it's like, you want to do it? Yeah, let's do it.
How interesting, because, I had picked up that they had like a previous relationship, Decker and Ilea, and I picked up that they had a previous relationship, and Kirk was like, oh my God, are you going to be okay? And she's like, don't worry. Like, I had sworn an oath, or have an oath of celibacy, and I Googled it, and I was like, the only info that I quickly found was that Deltans, when they, work in Starfleet, take that oath of celibacy. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. But how interesting that they are this crazy creature.
Gene Roddenberry, who's a perv, we know that, goes on about how the Deltans and their society, they are a sexual society. And so my question is, why would Starfleet put humans on the planet? Wait.
Anyway,
but this is Roddenberry's notes, and Alan Dean Foster did the novelization.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway.
Yeah, so hot bald lady shows up, and thankfully Kirk's not going to go for that because she's not blonde.
But not his type at all.
And also, Carrie's holding up another toy.
These are original Mego figures from the movie, 3 3/4 inch, as you can see, not very detailed. But there's the Ilea action figure.
Wow, and I love when she first walks on the bridge. Everybody else on the bridge is like, oh. Chekhov's reaction is extremely different. He gets the biggest smile on his face that I've ever seen Chekhov have. And I was like, yes, that's right. The second horniest man on the Enterprise. He's here.
That's our horny Chekhov.
That's our horny Chekhov. But in order to get the rest of the crew back together, we got to go track down our favorite chief medical officer, Dr. McCoy. Yes. And I was not prepared for Disco McCoy to show up on my screen.
Please.
He's got this beard. He's got this tracksuit. He's got this big gold medallion on his big hairy chest.
He is Disco McCoy, absolutely.
The scream I screamed. I was just not prepared to see him this way.
But refusing to get on the transporter pad until everybody goes through.
Yeah.
Not wanting to get on, and we never. I mean, it's in the book, but we don't in the movie get the backstory as to why he said, "I'll never return to Starfleet."
Oh, what's the backstory?
I'd have to go back and read it again. I don't remember that exactly. It is
Interesting.
in here though.
Sure. I mean, but I don't blame him. But then of course, Kirk, literally, it's been 2.5, 3 years, and McCoy's like, oh my God, again already? I've been out here living my best disco life. I want more of that.
You want more Disco McCoy?
I need more of what McCoy does in his downtime.
I want a Disco McCoy action figure. That's what I want.
I gotta tell you, I was devastated when he shaved his beard. I was like, couldn't you keep your beard? Does Starfleet have a regulation that you have to shave your beard?
I don't know if they would or not. Maybe, I don't know.
But anyway, they go off and do their thing, and they encounter a wormhole, which was one of the coolest scenes I've seen ever. Because
you liked that?
You didn't? That was so cool.
No, see, this surprises me because that's usually one of the first complaints that people who see this movie, they hate the wormhole sequence.
Oh my God, it was so cool. The way at the beginning, it's like barely noticeable. And I was like, oh, is this my TV? But then as they get further into the wormhole, it gets, the lighting and the stretching and they're slow talking. I was like, this is some cool effects. I can't believe people complain about this. I thought it was so awesome.
It's one of the least favorite parts of the movie for people. It's just astounding.
That's insane. It is. This section of the movie is where I have the note. This movie could shave off 20 minutes easily because there's a lot of this movie drags.
Oh, yes.
And I'll talk about it later when I get to like the trivia bits, but like this was one of the first, or not one of the first. The Enterprise was the introduction of the Enterprise was the first, but I was like, wow, this movie is too long. And some of these scenes are too long and unnecessary.
Some of the scenes are, it's true. This movie does tend to drag. And that was, again, one of the big complaints after we had Star Wars, which was nonstop, And here comes Star Trek, the motion picture, with, these long and plot out. And of course, the sci-fi nerds like me were like, well, that's what Star Trek is, okay? It's not your, that's what we do. We're exploring space. You be quiet.
Yeah, but they're coming up against the entity that they are chasing, right? And it's going to attack them. And Kirk says to fire phasers, but Will Decker is like, oh my God, don't do that. Do this instead. And I was like, oh my God, Will Decker, he's quickly becoming my favorite because I love that he's like, oh my God, this old man has no idea what he's doing with this updated ship. The phasers would not have worked, so we had to fire the photon torpedoes. And again, this takes 10 minutes because they're moving in slow motion.
There's your Will Decker action figure.
Will Decker action figure. Will you leave that to me in your will?
Sure. It doesn't look anything like him, but there you go.
Yeah.
All right.
But this is the instance where Will Decker has it out with Kirk, where he asks, can I speak freely? And he says, you are old and don't know this ship. And I think Kirk might be having a midlife crisis. Like, that's got to be the reason why he was like, I got to get the Enterprise back.
Yeah. I mean, he's been behind a desk for 3 years. So, naturally.
Yeah, he's got to be going through a midlife crisis.
Although you have to admit, his hubris is what's pushing this whole thing. He's convinced that he's the only guy because he's been out there for 5 years. He did it better than anybody. He's convinced he's the guy that can save the Earth.
Yeah, I do like that he's not pushy about that fact, and instead he allows for feedback. Because he is pretty stubborn. Kirk is pretty stubborn. But with this feedback, especially from McCoy and Deckard,
yes,
he is like, oh my God, maybe they're right. I'm jumping into this way too fast.
Well, it starts with McCoy, where, Kirk's up there saying, I need warp speed now, and everybody's telling him we're not ready. And McCoy comes up behind him, friendly Dr. McCoy, his friend, not his officer, fellow officer. He's like, Jim, you're pushing. These people know their jobs. Dr. McCoy.
Stop micromanaging.
Right. Yes.
Love it. But then, oh my gosh, I can't believe we haven't even talked about what our friend Spock has been up to this entire time. Spock has been on his planet Vulcan, which, by the way, seeing the planet Vulcan was so cool.
Isn't it, though?
Did not like Spock's page boy haircut. The wig that he was wearing was a little bit much. But Spock has gone through the ritual on Vulcan, where it is the ritual where they purge all of their emotions. And I can only imagine how difficult this is for our friend Spock, who is half human.
More so. The half human part, which is why going into it, a lot of the Vulcans were like, he's not going to make it.
So Spock shows up on the Enterprise, and I'm like, oh my God, it's our friend Spock. And it is not our same friend Spock. He is not friendly. He's extremely Vulcan and straightforward and to the point, and can't even be bothered with small talk. But it turns out, while he was on Vulcan, he felt a presence that was essentially this entity. So the Enterprise and Spock are on a similar path to discover this entity, so they might as well travel together.
Yes.
Not for fun. And the way it broke my heart to see Kirk be like so excited to see his friend Spock, and Spock was just like, whatever, old flame, and couldn't even be arsed to be friendly with his old friend Captain Kirk.
Will you allow me?
I allow you to read an excerpt.
Because you have talked about the bromance between these two.
Please. Yes.
Here is an editor's note. Because as he's on Vulcan in the book, he in his mind is saying, Jim, goodbye, my Thyla. And then there's an asterisk. Editor's note, the human concept of friend is most nearly duplicated in Vulcan thought by the term Thyla, which can also mean brother and lover. Spock's recollection, from which this chapter is drawn, is that most difficult moment for him, since he did indeed consider Kirk to have become his brother. However, because Thyla can mean lover, and since Kirk and Spock's friendship was unusually close, this has led to some speculation over to whether they had actually indeed become lovers. At our request, Admiral Kirk supplied the following comment on this subject.
What?
I know, you're getting excited, aren't you? I was never aware of this lovers rumor, although I have been told that Spock encountered it several times. Apparently, he has always dismissed it with his characteristic lifting of his right eyebrow, which usually connoted some combination of surprise, disbelief, and or annoyance. As for myself, although I have no moral or other objections to physical love in any of its many earthly, alien, and mixed forms, we know that.
Brother lovers, they're brother lovers.
I have always found my best gratification in that creature woman. Also, I would dislike being thought of as so foolish that I would select a love partner who came into sexual heat only once every 7 years. Editor's note. The human concept of friend is most nearly duplicated in Vulcan thought by the term Thyla, which can mean brother and lover. Spock's recollection, from which this chapter is drawn, is that it was a most difficult moment for him, since he did indeed consider Kirk to have become his brother. However, because Thyla can mean also lover, and since Kirk and Spock's friendship was unusually close, this has led to some speculation over whether they had actually indeed become lovers. At our request, Admiral Kirk supplied the following comment on the subject. I was never aware of the lovers rumor, although I have been told that Spock encountered it several times. Apparently, he had always dismissed it with his characteristic lifting of his right eyebrow, which usually connoted some combination of surprise, disbelief, and or annoyance. As for myself, I have no moral or other objections to physical love in any of its many earthly, alien, and mixed forms.
Brother lovers, they're brother lovers.
I have always found it my best gratification in that creature woman. Although I would dislike being thought of as so foolish that I would select a love partner who came into sexual heat only once every 7 years.
Ay. They had to have at least once. At least once.
Probably. All right.
And McCoy also, he walks in and he's also like, so help me, I'm actually pleased to see you. And Spock just has no reaction, which just absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
So
Up, he's yeah.
yeah. So right around this time is kind of where I was like, oh my God, they could shave off a whole 30 more minutes of this movie. But, they come across the entity and Spock tries to mind meld with it. I can't remember the order of operations here. They encounter the probe. They're able to communicate it with, so it stops attacking the Enterprise, and it sends a probe on board, which is just like a bolt of lightning going through the whole ship, and they're fine not to interact with it as long as it doesn't seem to harm them. And Chekhov even says, "Don't worry, I'm not going to interfere with it." And
then the probe starts going into the memory banks of the Enterprise.
Yes.
It's searching history, which they have no problem with. But then it starts to get into the specs of the Enterprise, and specifically its defense and weapons, and then Earth's defenses. And that's when Spock steps up and smashes the computer so that it can't get that information.
And that's when it gets pissed, and it lightning bolts Ilea and essentially kills Ilea. And while they are busy taking care of Ilea, Spock decides to go try to mind meld with whatever this entity is, and finds out it's a living machine. Spock essentially has found the Matrix, and the whole point of this living machine Matrix is to find information and gather as much information as possible. And for what reason? Who knows? But then back to Ilea on the ship. She's no longer Ilea. She has become the entity known as V'ger.
She is the Ilea probe, yes.
She is the Ilea probe. And her whole deal is find the creator. And from what we can piece together, the creator is on Earth. And so that's why it is heading towards Earth. And Deckard is like, well, I'll see if I can get to Ilea, because they had a previous romantic relationship, and she's still gotta be in there somewhere. And V'ger is just having none of it. When Spock tries to mind meld, he comes back, and he kind of comes back as the Spock that we know. And because there's one thing that V'ger could not comprehend, and he doesn't expressly say it, but it's got to be the power of love between two friends, because Spock seems finally to be happy to be back with Kirk, and it kind of seems like we have the Spock that we know. And then, honestly, the rest of the movie is V'ger being like, where's creator? And they're like, okay, well let's get in touch with Earth. We'll see if we can try to find creator or whatever. The Ilea probe sends out this message, gets no response, and is like, well, time to kill all humanity, because that
well, because the creator did not answer.
Yeah, but why is the response to kill all humanity?
The probe is here. I have all this information that you sent me to get. I collected it all. All of the knowledge of the universe is behind me here. I'm here to send it to you, and you have not answered. So that clearly means that the carbon units that have infested the Enterprise have also infested Earth. And the creator couldn't possibly be a carbon unit, because these things are so flawed. The creator had to have been, just like the probe. I got to be, So what I need to do is I need to get rid of all of these humans, and then the creator will be able to answer, because clearly they're screwing things up.
Gotcha. But then Kirk does a classic Kirk bluff 'em and is like, well, you can't kill us because we got to take you to the creator. And essentially buys them some time with his classic Kirk bluff 'em. And where does I must have missed how this happened in the movie, but they are then in a room with the creator, air quotes.
That was all part of Kirk's bluff, is that we can only contact the creator if we're in the same room as V'ger. We can only do that if we're near V'ger, then we can do that. So you've got to bring us to V'ger. You have to get us there, and so that's when the ship comes in. That's when they walk out and they go down into that bowl or whatever it is, and That's where they
that
discover.
big room with V'ger, which they discover is a Voyager probe sent by NASA more than 300 years ago. It's the Voyager 6. And in real Earth, we've only sent out, I think, 2 Voyager probes. But so Voyager 6 was a fictional creation. But the whole purpose of the Voyager probe is to gather information from the universe and report back to Earth. And so when the Voyager probe came in contact with this living machine entity thing, the living entity thing, merged with the Voyager probe, and its whole deal was consume as much information as possible and take it back to Earth. But it grew so smart, it became sentient, and that's why it's on this big evil mission.
Yeah, it became self-aware, but it still had questions like, is this all that I am? Am I just a big computer?
Questions we all have. Yeah,
this? Exactly.
Questions we all have. And personally, I thought that was a killer reveal. I thought that was so clever. And wow, humans really are the monsters all along, right? But then in order to complete it, it has to merge with humanity.
Well, what the probe does is we figure out that it's Voyager 6. We figure out what its programming is. Uhura, get me the codes to let the probe know that we send the information. It must be in the library computers. And she's like, of course it is. Calls it up. So, and you have to send it via transmission old style, not the new style of transmission. It has to be the old style. So they start sending it to V'ger. And Decker's got his tricorder and he goes, okay, here it comes. And it's a series of numbers. And he says, and the final sequence. And suddenly there's a psh, 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 psh on V'ger. V'ger severs the antenna. It doesn't want the information that way. It decides that it wants to meet and touch the creator. Well, that's a problem because the guys who made the probe, long dead, of course. Dead. Right. So that's V'ger's counter Kirk, gambit. It's like, oh, okay, well, you got to bring him up. You got to bring him up. That's the only way that I'm going to destroy the planet unless it's a hostage situation. Bring him up. And that's when V'ger goes, I want to merge with the creator. I want to touch the creator. And the creator is humans. And so Ilia, Decker.
And they merge and become space dust and leave into another dimension as an entirely new type of life force creation. And wildly, that's where the movie ends. Like, there's no further, would love to have seen a debriefing with Starfleet maybe to kind of go over the events that just happened, because they don't even list Ilia and Decker as missing. They're like, or as dead. They're like, just list them as missing.
They're missing.
No follow-up from Starfleet about maybe what happened there. Instead, it's just, oh, well, we found it and we solved the problem. The end. Goodbye, folks. That's Star Trek.
That's pretty much the way the book ends too.
That's insane.
It's like this page, that page, and that page, and there's your end after the creation of this new life form. It's like, oh, okay, I guess we're done here. We saved the Earth. All right.
Oh. And so the first half of the movie, awesome. Love Star Trek. Way to go, team. By the end of the movie, I'm like, oh, I see now where the flaws are. Some reactions from from people who worked on it. William Shatner, who saw the completed film for the first time at the world premiere, was struck.
Everybody did. Everybody did, because it wasn't finished.
Yikes. He was struck by the overall sluggishness of the film and was convinced that the Star Trek franchise died there and then. He opined, well, that's it. We gave it our best shot. It wasn't good and it will never happen again.
Well, it was an episode of a TV series stretched out. The plan was Star Trek Phase 2. That's what they were going to do. It was going to bring back Star Trek as a TV series. But then, oh wait, this whole Star Wars thing. We should go to the movies with this. We should definitely make. So that's why there's a lot of padding going on. Also, this plot is pretty much identical to the Changeling from the original series.
Yes, it is. Very much.
It is pretty much essentially the same plot, just a little bit more elaborate.
Leonard Nimoy, he spoke briefly about the film, saying it was a very finely crafted film and it did well, but from the actor's point of view, frankly, it was frustrating. We didn't feel that we were getting to play the characters that we enjoyed playing in the way that we knew how to play them, and it was frustrating for Gene Roddenberry too. It wasn't the story or script he had wanted, and the gaps seemed filled with too much emphasis on special effects. Which, totally agree. I feel like they were leaning far too hard on, look at this fun special effects stuff that we can do now. Years later, at a 2012 Los Angeles Times video interview, Nimoy added that he too had felt that the movie had left the franchise stranded like a beached whale, at the time clarifying that I think Robert Wise and Gene Roddenberry were looking for a 2001 Space Odyssey kind of thing, like Stanley Kubrick had done. A cold and cool, we're out here in space and it's kind of quiet and things move very slowly. There was a lot of that cerebral stuff and there just wasn't enough drama. It wasn't a Star Trek movie. We had the Star Trek people, but we didn't use as Star Trek characters very well. Which he nailed it, right? Like, these are my friends and I'm so happy to see my friends again. What are they doing? They're just not being very exciting.
Exactly.
During the rewrites of the final scenes, studio executives clashed with Gene Roddenberry about the script's ending, believing that the concept of a living machine was too far-fetched. The executives consulted Isaac Asimov. If the writer decided a sentient machine was plausible, the ending could stay. Asimov loved the ending, but made one small suggestion. He felt that the use of the word wormhole was incorrect, and that the anomaly the Enterprise found itself in would be more accurately called a temporal tunnel.
Yes, exactly. Which it's funny because, back in the day, all we had was Starlog magazine, and that was a sci-fi fan magazine, and they would do big articles about this kind of thing where they would interview scientists and say, and there was a whole article I remember about the Star Trek the Motion Picture wormhole situation, and so the scientist would go, well, yeah, wormhole's not a great term. It really, what they're talking about could happen theoretically, but it wouldn't be a wormhole. It would be called something else, and it's the same magazine that Harlan Ellison was having a hard time with the space slug in the meteor in Empire Strikes Back. But that's,
I would watch a 30 to 40 minute YouTube video essay about the comparisons between Star Trek the Motion Picture and Interstellar, because at one point I was like, oh, am I just watching Interstellar? Because that a lot of the effects reminded me of Interstellar. So if anyone wants to point me in the direction of that YouTube video essay, love to watch it.
Surely that exists.
It's gotta. And lastly, this film was the basis for McDonald's first Happy Meal movie tie-in promotion. It said that 50 million Star Trek meals were delivered to 4,500 outlets.
I bought at least 10 of them.
Do you still have them? Do you still have the promotional toys? Carrie?
Sadly, no. I sold them at toy shows and things along through the years. I did save the boxes and the toys, but then I sold them. I didn't think they'd be worth anything, and they really weren't at the time.
Look at you
but
now
they might be. I don't know.
Do you know how many Instagram reels I have watched about people playing with vintage McDonald's toys?
Well, you can watch the Time Closet here on the Geekshow YouTube, and that's me playing with my vintage toys. So that's... You get that.
Some lovely self-promotion. But that's Star Trek the Motion Picture. I don't know what I would rate it if I had to rate it. Maybe 6.5 out of 10. Maybe if I'm thinking about numbers, because it was fine.
Yeah, and I think you're being generous, but as much as I love it. There were a lot of problems building up to this movie, but and like I said, at the premiere, that was the first time that anybody saw a final cut. The print was still wet. They were still working on the special effects up till the last minute because the original crew that they had hired to make the special effects completely crapped out. And they couldn't get anybody at ILM. They couldn't get anybody. So they called up this guy, Douglas Trumbull, who did some work on 2001 and who later would work on Close Encounters. So they called up Douglas Trumbull, and he says, I think I can do your Star Trek. And he pretty much got his team together. They got it, but it was last minute. It was very last minute. But I remember being there opening day at the Fox Theater in Provo, and I did not know it at that time. But my dear friend Jeff Weiss was also in the audience.
Aww.
Hadn't met him yet. Wasn't until years later that I met him.
Serendipitous.
So there you go. And he and I both, they used to sell stuff like this at the theaters. This is my favorite piece of Star Trek the Motion Picture memorabilia. I got it at the movie on opening day. It was $1. I still have it. As you can see, they just sold that at the concession stand.
Pin.
It's the little silver pin that Kirk is wearing in the beginning of the movie.
That's a good-looking pin.
It's a great-looking pin, and it's so delicate. I want to wear it. I
wouldn't
put it
dare.
on my hats and things, but I'm afraid to. I don't want to lose it or break it.
It's made of aluminium. You'll breathe on it wrong. It looks like it'll break.
It is very frail. But I love that pin. Maybe if you know what, I'll bet somebody could do a recreation of that and make me a new one. Anyway, but then also we finally got some decent toys, what I considered decent toys at the time, for Star Trek. I mean, we got these 3 3/4 inch
in their
figures.
Skims uniforms.
Their pajamas. This is the Dr. McCoy, right there. You see on the back.
Oh,
Those
is
are all
Disco
the figures
McCoy? Is Disco McCoy?
Disco
a
McCoy
figure?
is not. Regular McCoy was, but not Disco McCoy.
I would pay good money for Disco McCoy.
We need a Disco McCoy. And there's your friend Scotty right there.
My friend Scotty with his mustache. He was rocking that mustache.
That mustache, yes. So there you go. But this pin is still my favorite. A little bit of Star Trek the Motion Picture memorabilia. And then when I went to New York for the first time, I was just a youngin'. Bill and I went to do some radio from there, and we stayed with an old friend of his from college or from acting in New York. Mm-hmm. And he says, I got something for you. I heard you were a Star Trek fan. And he gave me this.
Whoa.
This is a Star Trek the Motion Picture phaser. You can see it's a Star Trek.
Whoa.
But it's a water pistol. It's a squirt gun. So I could get you wet. But then we also got these toys, replica phasers.
Just regular phasers. Whoa. Don't get those in the water.
No, you don't want to get those in the water.
They barely used phasers in this movie.
Oh, they didn't hardly at all.
I don't think they did
the phasers on the ship.
Yeah, I don't think they did at all.
No, you won't get to see a phaser in use until Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Which will be coming up next week. We did kind of talk about Wrath of Khan episodes ago, but next week we'll do a full deep dive into Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. But until then, any last words about the motion picture?
I'm just surprised that you liked it as much as you did.
I don't know why you're surprised. Sure... I tend to overly enjoy anything Star Trek.
Listen, when we started this, I thought the plan is that you were going to shit on Star Trek and I would try to defend it. And it's not been that show.
No, sorry. Sorry that I came here to just love Star Trek and only talk about Star Trek. Literally, I can't go out places with people anymore because I have to preface every conversation with sorry, I can only talk about Star Trek. It's my entire personality now. That's all I can talk about now. We have today, as of recording, today is Halloween, and we of course procrastinated, so I had ordered my husband a Captain Pike yellow uniform top, and hopefully it arrives today for the trick-or-treaters.
Fingers crossed.
Amazon says it'll be here before 10, and I'm like, well, sooner would be nice. So
and as the poster, which we have as the background here, which is just, I think it's my favorite Star Trek.
It's gorgeous.
Poster. And at the bottom of the poster it says, and that's where I want to take this podcast, as you can see on my matchbook, promotional matchbook. The human adventure is just beginning.
Oh, and that's how the movie ends, too, with that title card.
Because, see, Star Wars is aliens.
And it took place so long ago.
Yeah.
The future
So,
is
yeah.
now.
So,
What?
yeah.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for listening to us talk about Star Trek the Motion Picture. And, you know, leave a comment. What are your thoughts on Star Trek the Motion Picture? Would love to get more comments from people. I just want to talk about Star Trek. So, and you know, tune in next week. Next week we'll talk about Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. But until then, we'll keep going where no man has gone before, but a lot of men have gone before. Thanks, everybody.